And then he gives the reason why he wants them to be filled with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. That's verse 10. I want you to be filled with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might according to his glorious power, for all patience and long-suffering with joy. There are two basic reasons why Paul wants them to be filled with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Those two basic reasons are verse 11, so that they can walk worthy, and verse 12, so that they can be strengthened with all might. So that's what we're going to be looking at this evening, and then we'll go from there. We're going to be looking at verse 11, verse 10, excuse me. Verse 10, they want to walk worthy, and verse 11, they want to be strengthened with might. All right, let's look at walking worthy. There are three components of walking worthy, and those three components are found in verse 10. If you are walking worthy, then you are going to be fully pleasing God. You're going to be fruitful in every good work, and you're going to be increasing in the knowledge of God. So let's look at those three things. To please God, it's a real simple recipe. Really, really simple. Hebrews 11 and verse 6, the Hebrews writer gives us a very, very simple recipe on how to please God. Without faith, it's impossible to please him, for he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. All right, there are just a few things that are essential to please God. First of all, you got to believe him. Second of all, you got to diligently seek him. Third of all, you have to come to him, right? Those that come to God must believe that he is, and you have to believe that he'll reward you, right? So just a handful of things on pleasing God. You're either going to please God or you're going to displease God. There's no straddling the fence here, right? Sometimes the world looks at pleasing God as if it were like a cup half full or a cup half empty. Well, I'm not the best Christian there is. I'm not the best person there is, but there are people worse than me. It's not how that works. You are either pleasing him or you're not pleasing him. There's no middle mark here. You're either doing what you're supposed to be doing or you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You recall Matthew 12 and verse 30, Jesus says, "He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather me scatters abroad." Another verse that we can throw into the mix is, what does Jesus say there in Matthew? Is it 6:24? No man can serve two masters, for either he will love the one and despise the other, or else he will cling to the one and hate the other, something like that, right? A variety of verses describe how you have to choose whether or not you're going to please God or not. The other passage that comes to mind is 1 John. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all, 1 John 1, verse 5. Joshua 24, verse 15. Choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the God of your fathers that were on the other side of the flood or the God of the Amorites. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. 2 Kings 18:21. But if it seem evil unto you to serve God, choose you this day whom you will serve. If the Lord be God, serve him. But if Baal be God, serve him. Right? There's a variety of verses out there that all talk about this separation. There's only two options that you have in front of you. Right? You're either for God or you're against God. You're either going to serve God or you're not going to serve God. You're either going to call God your master or you're not going to call God your master. You're either going to call God your Elohim, or you're not going to call God your God. You have to choose. There is no middle ground here. There is no straddling the fence. Right? You are either going to please God or you are not going to please God. And that's important for the Colossians. Go ahead, Paul. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another example, right? I'd rather you be hot or cold, but you're in the middle, you're lukewarm, right? Lots of different examples, right? And when it comes to eternity, the same thing is going to apply. You're either going to be very hot or you're going to be in heaven with God, right? There's no purgatory. There is no in-between realm. It's one or the other. Here's another one, Matthew 7:13 and 14. There's a straight and narrow way, and there's a wide and broad way that leads to destruction, right? How many times does God have to make it clear for us to realize that there is only one right answer and there's no middle ground, right? There's one right answer, there's one wrong answer, there's no middle ground. You're either on his side or you're against him. How many times does he have to say it? He says it so many times. We ought to believe it. This is going to be very important for the Colossians because they're going to be dealing with this Colossian heresy, and they're going to want to start pleasing other religions, other gods per se. Not directly the gods, but the people who are advocating for these gods, right? We're going to get into the Colossian heresy in chapter 2. Colossian heresy essentially is a combination religion of Christianity, Judaism, and mysticism, right? There's this error that is going on in Colossae, and Paul is going to have to. Here's another passage. Let's go look at this one. Let's open our Bibles to Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. All right. Paul is essentially going to tell these Galatians here what he's telling the Colossians. It's very similar. In fact, the Colossians and the Galatians are going to share an issue, which is Judaism. There was a bunch of Judaizers in both the city of Colossae and in the region of Galatia. Right? Galatians chapter 1, beginning in verse 6 here. I'm going to read this one so I don't mess it up. Paul says, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you into the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than that we have preached, let him be accursed, as we have said before. So now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than that you have received, let him be accursed. Right, the general idea that Paul, we'll read verse 10 in a second. The general idea that Paul is describing to the Galatians here is that anytime there is a perverted gospel, anytime there is a change to the gospel message, whoever is teaching that and whoever is believing that is going to be accursed. Anathema is the Greek word, totally cut off. Right. Notice verse 10. Paul is going to allude to the motivation behind these perverted gospels. For do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Right? The beginning of many false doctrines, probably every false doctrine, but at least many false doctrines. The beginning of many false doctrines is the desire to please men, the desire to be popular in people's eyes. That is the origin of many false doctrines, right? And as Christians, we are not motivated, we ought not to be motivated to please men, we ought to be motivated to please God, and that's what Paul is praying on behalf of the Colossians there. Any thoughts or questions? I know we touched a lot of different stuff just then. Any thoughts or questions on pleasing God? Mm-hmm. And then Paul even mentioned in Revelation where he would rather you be honored. Right. But at the same time, that word be walking, we're going to misstep once in a while. Yes, yeah. And Peter's an excellent example. Right. Because if you were to look at Peter in the scriptures, right. Right. Probably not. He was fire. He was bullish. Right. Come to that. But at the same time, he walked worthy. Right. But did he have times of weakness? Yes, he did. Right. Right. But God still had confidence. That's right. You know, even Paul, I thought about this while we were reading this. Galatians 1 verse 10, for if I yet still please men, I should not be the bondservant of Christ. Paul would actually, after writing this by inspiration, he would bend the rules break the rules, really, but of Christianity. There was occasion, it's around Acts 21, Acts 22, somewhere in there, where he comes back to Jerusalem. Remember that's what happens at the end of his third missionary trip. That's his return trip to Jerusalem starts in Acts 20. And he returns to Jerusalem, and some of the Judaizers there in Jerusalem tell Paul, they say, Paul, you've got a bad reputation. Your reputation is that you don't think we're under the Old Testament still. So what we want you to do is we want you to take these Nazarites, these people who have taken a vow. We want you to take these Nazarites up to the temple, make a sacrifice to show everybody that you are still a Jew, that you're still under the Old Testament. And that's exactly what Paul did. Right? Paul acquiesced to their request to prove that he was still under the Old Testament. Is Paul still under the Old Testament after becoming a Christian? No. But what was he doing there? He was pleasing men. Right? Every single person, except for Jesus, every single person has a flaw, has some sort of sin. Right? Nobody is going to be completely perfect. That does not mean that despite our imperfections, we cannot be worthy, right? Worthiness is going to include flaws that are confessed, flaws that are acknowledged, flaws that are worked on, flaws that are tried to be overcome, right? That's all included in that idea of walking worthy. Other thoughts or questions or comments on walking worthy or pleasing God? Okay, let's look at part 2 of walking worthy. So part 1 is pleasing God. Part 2, to walk worthy, Colossians 1:10. We need to be fruitful in every good work. I think I've mentioned this story before. I once attended a congregation in which for their 5th Sunday, 4th Sunday, whatever the rotation was, Sunday evening, they wheeled out a TV and they put in a VHS tape, which at that point was old. At this point, it's ancient. And they put in a VHS tape into this, TV that's that wide, from front to back. And so I don't know what the VHS tape was. I don't know who the preacher was. I don't know what the series was, but the preacher on that VHS tape said something that I'll never forget. I don't think I'll ever forget because I've been thinking about it for a while now. He said this: the church is not a country club for Christians; it is a hospital for sinners. Right, and that really changed my perspective about how we viewed the church, because a lot of times we don't view the church as a hospital for sinners. We view the church as a country club for the saints, as a place that we can gather together and we can hang out with each other, and we can, have potlucks and eat cake and go bowling and this, that, and the other. Just have a good old time together, right? That's not what the church is designed for. Not that that's bad. Of course, the Bible, the New Testament, talks about the need for edification, building one another up, and what better place to build one another up than beating each other in bowling. But not that that's bad, but that's not the purpose. That's not the main focus. The main focus is evangelism. The main focus is spreading the good news so that sinners can be saved. You remember what Jesus said? He said, I have come to seek and save that which is lost. Well, guess what? He gave us that same mission, the Great Commission, right before he ascended into heaven. That's our mission in life, is to seek and save that which is lost, to continue Jesus' mission, right? And so that's going to include doing good works, right? The Lord wants us to do good works. He wants us to be fruitful in every good work, is how Paul describes it there in Colossians 1 and verse 10, right? Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 5 and verse 16, let your light shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven, right? Your good works are not about you. The good works of the church is not about the church. The good works is about glorifying God. The good works is about pointing people towards God, reflecting your light so that people can see the light of God. That's the idea of let your light so shine. Let. It's not like you're shining a flashlight in somebody's eyes. This is a reflective light. Like the moonlight, it reflects. Boy, did you all see that moon tonight? It was real bright. Yeah. It's reflecting the light of the sun, and just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, we reflect the light of God. That's the idea of letting your light so shine. It's not about us. Our good works is not about us. They are about God. They are about helping others reach God. Right? Yes. Right. That's right. That's right. Matthew 25 there, right in the middle of his Olivet Discourse, right at the tail end of his Olivet Discourse. When you saw me hungry, you fed me. When you saw me thirsty, you gave me drink. When you saw me naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you visited me, so on and so forth. Right? Yeah, it is. Yeah, I as one who preaches every so often, I come to this passage and I want to reference this passage. Boy, it always gives me a dilemma of reading the whole passage or just summarizing it, because boy, there's a lot of meat in that passage, and but it's like 20 verses long. It's kind of hard to fit that into a sermon. So a wonderful, wonderful passage, though something that we need to think of. Certainly need to think of. Any thoughts or questions or comments on being fruitful for every good work? Yeah, not to be seen by men. That's not the motivation. Yeah, it's the motivation is to help people. You remember the Good Samaritan? Of course, the Good Samaritan was a parable, right? So he's not a real fella. But what reward did the Good Samaritan receive for helping that man beaten on the side of the road? Did either the priest or the Levite who had walked on the other side of the road, did they come up and say, "Boy, Good Samaritan, you're so good. We're gonna, give you some money to repay you"? Or sometimes you'll hear on the news, a lot of times you'll hear on the news about this Good Samaritan who did this thing, and then they start, interviewing the Good Samaritan. Was the actual Good Samaritan ever interviewed? Was he recognized by his surrounding community? Yeah, only by the Lord, who put him in a parable, right? Again, he's not a real fellow, right? This Good Samaritan who was, described, he was not rewarded monetarily. He was not rewarded in a popularity. He was rewarded only by the Lord, and that should be our motivation as well, right? We don't do things. We don't do good works to be seen by men. We don't do good works to earn salvation. We do good works because we're expected to do good works. You remember what Paul said in Ephesians 2 verses 8 through 10. You remember Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, right? That one's quoted all the time. For we are saved by faith, for we are saved by grace through faith, not of works, lest any of us should boast. And then verse 10, he says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. We are God's workmanship. Literally, the Greek word for workmanship there in Ephesians 2:10 is poem. We're God's poem. We're the thing that God spent a lot of time on, poured a lot of emotion into. We are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. That's why we do good works, is because Christ created us to do good works. That's our whole purpose in life, right? Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole of man. Our whole purpose in life is to do good works, is to fear God, is to keep his commandments. That's what we were designed to do, right? And so we shouldn't do it as a begrudging obligation. We shouldn't do it for the rewards. We should do it just because. Just because. That's what's expected of us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. That's that's right. Uh-huh. Um, when I was in high school, I studied a little of this fellow named Simon Sinek. He's a cultural anthropologist. Anyway, he described four happy hormones, and he described oxytocin, which is probably the one that oxytocin and dopamine are probably the two that we're most familiar with of the four happy hormones. The other two is serotonin and endorphins. Endorphins is what you get whenever you exercise. Not me. I don't get that when I exercise. But, those are your four happy hormones. Anyway, Simon Sinek describes how every time that I'll paint the same mental picture that he painted. If you see somebody walking down the sidewalk and they're carrying a big load and they drop all their papers or groceries on the side of the sidewalk. When they start to pick it up, if you stoop down and you start helping them up, the person who's being helped gets a boost of oxytocin. You helping them gets a boost of oxytocin. And the people seeing you help them gets a boost of oxytocin. Everybody walks away happier whenever you help somebody in need. Literally everybody. They've done studies on it. Literally everybody walks away happier whenever you help somebody in need. That's not an accident. Right? God designed us to enjoy helping one another. God designed, you remember what Jesus said in John 10 and verse 10, I have come to give life and that more abundantly. Right? Christianity is not a burdensome religion. It's not a religion that denies self in the sense of denying what your body actually wants. Christianity is instead a religion that optimizes self. This is the way that you're supposed to live. You are, we talk about health all the time in our society now. When you're a Christian, you ought to be at your physical peak, you ought to be at your spiritual peak, you ought to be at your emotional peak, you ought to be at your psychological peak, because Christianity is designed to get you there. Christianity is designed to solve all of your problems. First and foremost, it's designed to solve your sin problem, which is going to be your biggest problem when Judgment Day rolls around or when death comes knocking on your door. Right. Yeah, good comment there. Yeah, it makes you feel better, makes you feel good whenever you help somebody. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Being fruitful unto every good work. Okay, part 3 of walking worthy is increasing in the knowledge of God. Boy, in the last couple of verses, Paul has mentioned twice his desire for the Colossians to increase in knowledge. Twice in the same passage, twice in just a handful of verses, Paul says, I hope, I pray that you increase in knowledge. Do you think Paul put a lot of value in biblical knowledge? Do you think Paul thought biblical knowledge was important after praying about it twice within a couple of verses? Increasing biblical knowledge is imperative, and it is essential, and because of its utmost importance, it cannot be left up to chance. You cannot leave your biblical knowledge, your increase, your growth in biblical knowledge up to chance. You have to set up a intentional habit, an intentional routine to increase in biblical knowledge. This is no joke, right? Your biblical knowledge and then your application of your biblical knowledge is going to not only impact your salvation, but it's going to impact everybody's salvation that you ever come into contact with. This is no laughing matter. This is part of the reason why we gather together on Sunday morning, on Sunday evening, and on Wednesday evening, is to help each other to increase our biblical knowledge. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes.
giving of your time,
Right.
things for them, this and that. So all of that is benevolent.
Right.
But at some point, you got to have the knowledge so you're ready to share with them the
R-
rest of it.
that's right. That's right.
To lead them.
Right. That's right.
If you don't have the knowledge, then you can't help them
That's right.
spiritually.
You remember what David wrote in Psalm 119 and verse 11, "Thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against you." What he's doing there is he's wanting to make sure that he doesn't sin against the Lord whenever an opportunity arises. Well, the same thing applies for other people too, right? Thy word I have hid in my heart, so I don't sin against, or so that other people don't sin against God, so that I can help people not sin against God, right? We are our brother's keepers, despite what Cain would have preferred. We are put on this earth to help each other out, and if we don't take the first step, we're never going to help other people take the first step. Here's another verse that comes to my mind: Hosea 4 and verse 6. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Right. That was true of that physical nation, and that is going to be true of everyone spiritually speaking. Everyone's going to be destroyed for a lack of knowledge. You know, the world touts this idea of ignorance is bliss. You can have your truth. It's up to your interpretation. Every interpretation has its own merit. It's not true. There's only one truth. Jesus says that truth will make you free, John 8 and verse 32. Jesus says in John 14 and verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me, right? If you want to go to the Father, if you want to meet him in heaven one day and see him as he is, you're going to have to access him by the truth. And if you're going to access him by the truth, you've got to know the truth. And if you're going to know the truth, you've got to, guess what? Study the truth. Increase in biblical knowledge. Boy, the importance of biblical knowledge cannot be overstated. Here's another passage that came to my mind. What did the writer of the book of Judges describe those people doing twice? He says it twice in the same book of Judges. He says, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you think is right. What matters is what is right. And the only way to know what is right and what is wrong is to go to the creator of right and wrong. And you go to the creator of right and wrong through the Bible. He's given us everything that we need to figure out what is right and what is wrong. Okay, any thoughts or questions on this third part of walking worthy? Increase in the knowledge of God. Increase in biblical knowledge. Okay, so 3 parts of walking worthy. Verse 10, we need to walk worthy by pleasing God. We need to walk worthy by being fruitful in every good work. And we need to walk worthy by increasing in the knowledge of God. Now let's go on to Colossians 1 and verse 11. See, y'all didn't think we would get into a second verse tonight, but here we are. There are 2 things involved with being strengthened with might. Right? That's Paul's second motivation for his prayer, is that they might be strengthened with might. 2 things involved here. Number 1, to be strengthened with might is according to his glorious power. Let's read Colossians 1 verse 11. Strengthened with all might according to his glorious power for all patience and long suffering with joy. So strengthened with might is going to include God's glorious power. It is God's power that strengthens us. You remember what Paul wrote in Philippians 4 and verse 13? I can do all things through who? Through Christ who strengthens me. Right? It's not me. It's not the gym. You might be able to go lift 600 pounds off the ground. Not me. I can't do that. And I certainly won't get endorphins if I try. But that's not what's going to strengthen you. That's not what's going to strengthen the soul. And furthermore, on Philippians 4:13, when Paul says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," I don't think he's necessarily describing, trying to open the pickle jar, right? I don't think Christ is going to strengthen you to open the pickle jar. Maybe deadlifting 600 pounds might help you open the pickle. What Paul is talking about there in Philippians 4:13, when Paul is talking about here in Colossians 1 and verse 11, is strength to overcome, strength to endure, spiritual strength to push on, strength from within.
It says in Ephesians the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might by his Spirit in the inner man.
Well, that's a great verse for this one. Wow. Yeah, that's a great commentary on this verse. Yeah. A parallel passage for this verse. Yeah. We're being strengthened in the inner man. That's the strength that matters. It's not external strength, it's internal strength that matters. Here's a verse that I've got written down. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 8, talking about external strength. For bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of life that now is and which is to come. Right? We need to focus on the internal. Go ahead. No. When I said that, I thought, oh man, if I was teaching the young adults class right now, they would not let me go. Sounds like you guys won't let me go. Yeah. I said something on Sunday in the young adults class. I said, God's voice is not like a whisper in my ear or something like that. And Jackson would not let that go. He just started shaking his head. Internal strength is what matters. Internal strength. It's what I need right now and during this. The second thing involved with being strengthened with my, not only is it in accordance with God's power, right? God's the one that's giving us strength, but also we need to be strengthened with might for all patience and long suffering with joy. I want to look at those three words here: patience, long suffering, and joy. I found this interesting about patience and long suffering, especially. Patience literally means staying under. All right, so think about carrying a heavy load. When we did the coat drive, a couple weeks ago, at the beginning of the morning, I went with Jackie out there to the shed, and we carried this big old tote full of sandbags. And then at the end of the day, I went with David and took that big old tote with the sandbags back. And I can tell you right now that load was heavier at the end of the day when I was already tired than at the beginning of the day. Or maybe Jackie just, held more than... Yeah, that's probably what it was. Yeah, I didn't think about that. When I went back with David, it took me 4 tries. I had to stop 4 different times. There's not a lot of distance there from the front door all the way to the shed. I had to stop 4 times to catch my breath, massage my fingers. They were cramping. And if I had long suffering, or if I had patience, I would have stayed under that thing the whole time. That's what the word patience means, is stay under. And we'll look at the other words next week, apparently. So that's where we'll pick up next week, because we're